Good morning, students. I hope you all are safe and sound at your homes. So, today we will study about democracy from our political science textbook. So, chapter number 1 we have what is democracy, why democracy. So in this chapter basically we will be discussing about what is democracy. Okay, what is democracy? We will try to understand this word and why democracy. Okay, these are the two fundamental questions we have in the chapter. So in this chapter everything revolves around the word democracy. So, straight away, we move on to the question what is democracy? So, my dear students, if you have your book, please read this discussion, this whole discussion, and try to do this activity. Okay, this will be your homework. You will be doing in a home task. Okay. So now let us discuss the simple definition of democracy. Okay, so what is democracy? So democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. Okay, so democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. So in a democracy, it is the people who elect the leaders or the rulers. But it is said this simple definition is not adequate. It is not sufficient. Why? Because it reminds us that democracy is people's rule. But if we use this definition in an unthinking manner, we would end up calling almost every government that holds an election a democracy. That would be very misleading. So, students, if we consider this definition as adequate or sufficient, then we will be misled because it is not enough to say that democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. So, in order to understand this definition, we have to go through carefully after each word and spell out the features of a democratic government. So, the next topic we have is the features of democracy. So, we have started with a simple definition that democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. This is the definition we have already studied. So, this raises many questions why we should not accept this definition, and this definition is not sufficient because it raises the many questions. So, what are the questions it raises? So, it raises who are the rulers in this definition? Which officials must be elected for any government to be called a democracy? Which decisions may be taken by non elected officials in a democracy? So, these are the questions regarding the rulers. Now, next question, what kind of election constitutes a democratic election? What conditions must be fulfilled for an election to be considered democratic? It is about the election. And third, we have who are the people who can elect the rulers or get elected as rulers. Should this include every citizen on an equal basis? Can a democracy deny some citizens this right? It is about the people. Who are the people? Finally, what kind of a form of government is democracy? Can elected rulers do whatever they want in a democracy? Or must a democratic government function with some limits? Is it necessary for a democracy to respect some rights of the citizens? Let us consider each of these questions with the help of some examples. So, the first feature of democracy is in a democracy, the final decision making power must rest with those elected by the people. So, this is the first feature of democracy, first characteristics of democracy. In a democracy, the final decision making power must rest with those elected by the people. So, students, in the case of Pakistan, it was not so because in Pakistan, General Pervez Musharraf led a military coup in October 1990. He overthrew a democratically elected government and declared himself the chief executive of the country. Later, he changed his designation to president and in 2002 held a referendum in the country that granted him a 5-year extension. So, General Pervez Musharraf, he was a military leader and he declared himself as the chief executive of the country, and later on he changed his designation from chief executive to the president of the country and extended his post to 5 years. In this regard, General Pervez Musharraf was not elected by the people. So, we cannot call it a democratic country. The second feature or the characteristics of democracy is a democracy must be based on a free and fair election where those currently in power have a fair chance of losing. So, in a democracy, there should be a free and fair election where the leaders, those who are ruling currently, they too have the chances of losing. So let us look at the example. Since its independence in 1930, Mexico holds elections after every 6 years to elect its president. The country has never been under a military or dictator's rule, but until 2000, every election was won by a party called PRI, Institutional Revolutionary Party. Opposition parties did contest elections but never managed to win. The PRI was known to use many dirty tricks to win elections. All those who were employed in government offices had to attend its party meetings. Teachers of government schools used to force parents to vote for the PRI. Media largely ignored the activities of opposition political parties except to criticize them. Sometimes the polling booths were shifted from one place to another in the last minute, which made it difficult for people to cast their votes. The PRI spent a large sum of money in the campaign for its candidates. So in the case of Mexico, we don't find this as a free and fair election, because they all the government officials, they force the people to vote for PRI, that is Institutional Revolutionary Party. So we cannot call Mexico as a democratic country. And the third feature of democracy is, in a democracy, each adult citizen must have one vote and each vote must have one value. So, one person, one vote, one value. So, one person can vote only once and that has only one value. That means one person, one vote, one value. Okay. Let us look at the example. In Fiji, the electoral system is such that the vote of an indigenous Fiji has more value than that of an Indian Fijian. So, in Fiji, you can see that one person, one vote, one value is not found, because an indigenous Fiji has a more value. That means that person has more value. That person's vote is more value than the Indian Fijian. Okay, so in Fiji, it does not fit, it does not suit there. So Fiji is not a democratic country. And the final feature of the democracy is, a democratic government rules within limits set by constitutional law and citizens' rights. So, the fourth and the final feature of democracy is, a democratic government rules within limits set by constitutional laws and citizens' rights. So, let us look at the example. Okay, rule of law and respect for rights. Zimbabwe attained independence from white minority rule in 1980. Since then, the country has been ruled by ZANU PF, the party that led the freedom struggle. Its leader, Robert Mugabe, ruled the country since independence. Elections were held regularly and always won by ZANU PF. President Mugabe was popular but also used unfair practices in elections. Over the years, his government changed the constitution several times to increase the powers of the president and make him less accountable. Opposition party workers were harassed and their meeting disrupted. Public protests and demonstrations against the government were declared illegal. There was a law that limited the right to criticize the president. Television and radio were controlled by the government and gave only the ruling party's version. There were independent newspapers, but the government harassed those journalists who went against it. The government ignored some court judgments that went against it and pressurized judges. He was forced out of the office in 2017. So, the example of Zimbabwe shows that popular approval of the rulers is necessary in a democracy, but it is not sufficient. So, in the case of Zimbabwe, the people's right was not respected because they were not allowed to do their things independently. Because if they were doing anything against the government, they were being harassed. So, we cannot say that in Zimbabwe it was a democracy. So, students, we have discussed the four features of democracy and the definition of democracy as well in a simple term. So, as a conclusion, what we can say, so let us now summarize the definition. So, let us sum up the discussion so far. We started with a simple definition that democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. So this simple definition we had started in the beginning of the chapter. So we found that this definition was not adequate unless we explained some of the key words or the key features used in it. Through a series of examples, we worked out four features of democracy as a form of government. Accordingly, democracy is a form of government in which rulers elected by the people take all the major decisions. Second, elections offer a choice and fair opportunity to the people to change the current rulers. The third, this choice and opportunity is available to all the people on an equal basis. And the final thing is the exercise of this choice leads to a government limited by basic rules of the constitution and citizens' rights. So this is the correct definition of democracy. Okay, we cannot consider that this form of definition is sufficient. It is not sufficient, but we can say that this definition is sufficient. We can include everything in the definition. So this is the real definition of the democracy. So please remember it. I hope you have understood the concepts. So today we have seen about the definition of democracy. So tomorrow we will be discussing why democracy is necessary in the nation or a country. So for time being, please try to understand the definition of democracy, and if you have any doubts, any clarification regarding the chapter, please let me know. For time being, thank you and have a nice day.